Looking into that rusted shell in the woods changed everything about what I thought I knew about trust, family, and the weight of buried secrets. What my old retriever Rex and I found inside that abandoned Chevelle would shake the very foundation of our small Indiana town and force me to confront a truth that had been hidden for over 3 decades. I suppose it all started back when I was 8 years old, trailing behind my grandfather Walter through the maze of rusted metal and forgotten dreams that was Kowalski's salvage yard on the outskirts of Richmond. The old man had hands like leather and a sixth sense for finding value where others saw only decay. "Tommy," he'd say, running his weathered fingers along a dented fender, "every piece of metal tells a story. Most folks just never learn how to listen." The smell of motor oil and rust became my childhood perfume, and the sound of his work boots crunching through gravel still echoes in my memory 40 years later. He taught me that patience and attention to detail could reveal treasures hidden in plain sight, lessons that would serve me well in ways I couldn't have imagined back then. Rex's great-grandfather, a German shepherd named Duke, would follow us through those metal canyons, nose to the ground, always alert to sense that human perception missed entirely. Those early mornings in the yard were my education in more than just automotive salvage. Walter would quiz me on engine configurations while we sorted through transmission housings, teaching me to read the subtle differences between similar parts that could mean the difference between profit and loss. He'd point out how rust patterns told stories about where a car had lived, how body damage revealed the circumstances of its final accident, how serial numbers could unlock the history of a vehicle's journey from factory to scrapyard. The old man had survived the Depression by understanding that nothing truly worthless existed, only things whose value hadn't been properly recognized or accessed. Duke seemed to understand the rhythm of our work, positioning himself where he could watch both approaches to the yard while we concentrated on our tasks, his alert ears tracking sounds that escaped our human attention. Winter afternoons found us huddled around a wood stove in the office trailer, Walter sharing stories about customers who'd found exactly what they needed in the most unlikely places, about barn finds that turned ordinary people into collectors, about the difference between giving up too early and knowing when to walk away. The transition from Walter's gentle guidance to my father's more demanding expectations marked the end of childhood innocence about the salvage business. Frank Kowalski had returned from Vietnam with a Purple Heart and a determination to expand our family operation into something more substantial than a rural scrapyard. His military bearing brought discipline to our inventory systems, but it also introduced a tension that hadn't existed during Walter's more relaxed management style. Frank demanded precise documentation for every transaction, maintained detailed customer records, and insisted on security measures that seemed excessive for a business dealing primarily in used car parts. Looking back, I recognize signs that should have raised questions. His reluctance to discuss certain customers, his habit of working late into the evening on projects he never fully explained, his tendency to handle specific transactions personally rather than trusting me or my mother with the details. Bruno, Duke's successor, developed an interesting habit of positioning himself between Frank and strangers who visited the yard, a subtle wariness that I interpreted as protective instinct rather than recognition of potential danger. My teenage years were spent learning every aspect of the business, while simultaneously pushing against Frank's increasing demands for perfection and discretion. He'd grown obsessive about maintaining separation between different categories of inventory, storing certain vehicles in sections of the yard that were off-limits to casual browsers. When I questioned these restrictions, he'd cite insurance requirements or legal complications that never quite made sense but effectively ended further discussion. My mother Sarah walked a careful line between supporting Frank's authority and protecting me from his growing intensity, her diplomatic skills preventing our personality conflicts from escalating into permanent estrangement. She managed the financial records with meticulous attention to detail, but I noticed she deferred to Frank completely when it came to transactions involving cash payments or customers who preferred not to provide complete identification. Bruno's offspring, a golden retriever named Caesar, inherited his father's protective instincts, but added a gentleness that made him equally comfortable with family members and genuinely trustworthy customers. Though he maintained his predecessor's wariness around certain visitors who triggered his alert responses. The Vietnam War's long shadow extended over our family dynamics in ways I didn't fully understand until years later. Frank's friendship with other veterans created a network of men who shared experiences they couldn't discuss with civilian family members, bonding over trauma and disillusionment that manifested in different ways. Some, like Frank, channeled their restlessness into building legitimate businesses. Others struggled with alcohol, unemployment, or anger that poisoned their relationships with wives and children who couldn't understand what they'd endured overseas. Frank's salvage yard became an informal gathering place for these men, who would arrive unannounced to help with heavy lifting, share beers after closing time, or simply sit in companionable silence while working on personal projects. I learned to recognize the signs that indicated when adult conversations were off limits to teenage ears, when my presence was unwelcome in certain areas of the yard, when questions about specific visitors or their business would be deflected or ignored entirely. Caesar developed an ability to read these social cues, positioning himself as a buffer between my curiosity and situations that adults preferred to handle privately. The complexity of Frank's character became more apparent as I entered my 20s and began taking greater responsibility for daily operations. His reputation in the community was impeccable. He served on the volunteer fire department, sponsored youth baseball teams, and regularly contributed to fundraisers for local families facing medical emergencies or natural disasters. Yet his business practices included gray areas that made me uncomfortable even when I couldn't articulate specific objections. He maintained relationships with customers who paid exclusively in cash, conducted transactions that weren't fully documented in our official records, and stored vehicles that seemed expensive relative to their stated purchase prices. When I raised concerns about potential legal complications, Frank would remind me that salvage operations had always involved flexible arrangements with customers who needed discretion about their automotive histories. The explanation satisfied my conscious mind while leaving my intuition unsettled, a cognitive dissonance that I learned to suppress rather than explore. Meeting Linda at a 4th of July celebration in 1984 introduced stability and perspective that helped balance my growing uneasiness about certain aspects of the family business. Her farm background gave her practical understanding of enterprises that operated according to seasonal rhythms and community relationships rather than corporate policies, but her ethical compass was calibrated differently than Frank's pragmatic approach to regulatory compliance. She accepted that the salvage yard involved complexities she didn't need to understand completely, trusting my judgment about which business practices were legitimate even when they appeared irregular to outside observers. Our courtship unfolded against the backdrop of Frank's increasing secrecy about certain transactions and customers, his growing tendency to handle specific aspects of the business personally rather than training me to take over completely. Linda's presence provided emotional grounding that helped me navigate the tension between family loyalty and personal integrity, though she couldn't resolve the underlying questions about Frank's activities that continued to surface despite my efforts to focus on legitimate aspects of our operations. Our wedding in 1985 marked a turning point in family dynamics, with Frank seeming to relax somewhat as Linda's stabilizing influence became apparent. She brought order to our domestic life, while respectfully avoiding areas of the business that Frank preferred to handle privately, creating a buffer zone that reduced friction between his secretive tendencies and my growing desire for transparency. The birth of Michael in 1986 and Jessica in 1988 shifted Frank's priorities noticeably, his grandfatherly instincts softening edges that had grown sharper during his most troubled post-war years. He began teaching the children skills that Walter had taught me, passing down legitimate knowledge about automotive restoration and salvage operations, while carefully avoiding exposure to whatever activities had required such elaborate security measures and discreet record-keeping. Caesar's son, a retriever named Apollo, integrated seamlessly into our expanding family structure, his gentle temperament making him an ideal companion for small children while maintaining the alertness that had characterized his lineage's relationship with our business operations. Frank's sudden death from a massive heart attack in March 1988 left me inheriting not just a successful business, but also unanswered questions about the extent of his activities and the implications of relationships he'd maintained with customers whose identities and purposes remain mysterious. The funeral drew an impressive crowd of community members whose respect for Frank was genuine and heartfelt, but it also attracted visitors whose connections to our family weren't entirely clear. Several men approached me with cryptic offers of assistance or advice about handling Frank's unfinished business, suggestions that I deflected while filing away mental notes about their names and faces. Linda's support during this transition was invaluable, her practical approach to grief helping me focus on legitimate business operations while gradually understanding the scope of what I'd inherited. Apollo seemed to sense the household's emotional upheaval, staying closer to the children during the day and positioning himself near windows and doors at night, as if maintaining vigilance that Frank could no longer provide. The immediate aftermath of Frank's death involved sorting through records and relationships that revealed the complexity of his business practices without completely clarifying their legal status. Several customers stopped visiting the yard entirely, apparently concluding that whatever services Frank had provided wouldn't be continued under my management. Others made tentative inquiries about accessing vehicles or parts that weren't reflected in our official inventory systems, requests that I handled with careful neutrality while avoiding commitments that might involve legal complications. My investigation of Frank's personal records revealed meticulously maintained documentation for legitimate transactions alongside more cryptic notes that suggested parallel activities requiring different levels of discretion. Linda's support during this period extended to accepting my need to sort through Frank's legacy privately, trusting my judgment about which discoveries needed to be shared and which were better handled as internal family matters requiring no outside involvement. The 1990s brought steady growth for the legitimate aspects of our salvage operation, built on the solid foundation of Frank's reputation and community relationships, while gradually phasing out the questionable elements that had made me uncomfortable. I focused on developing relationships with restoration enthusiasts and classic car collectors, markets that valued expertise and authenticity over the flexible arrangements that had characterized some of Frank's customer base. Linda's involvement in managing the business office brought transparency and organization that eliminated the dual record-keeping systems Frank had maintained, though I retained his habit of storing certain vehicles in secured areas of the yard to protect them from theft or vandalism. Michael and Jessica grew up understanding the legitimate aspects of automotive salvage while remaining unaware of the questions that had surrounded their grandfather's more mysterious activities. Apollo's son, Mars, inherited the family tradition of serving as both companion and early warning system, his reactions to strangers providing subtle guidance about which customers could be trusted and which required more careful handling. The children's progression through school coincided with my growing confidence in managing the salvage yard according to my own ethical standards while honoring the legitimate aspects of Frank's legacy. Michael showed early aptitude for computer systems, eventually choosing to pursue technology careers rather than following the family business tradition. Jessica demonstrated Frank's analytical mind applied to academic pursuits, becoming a teacher whose classroom management skills reflected lessons learned from observing adult behavior in our chaotic business environment. Both children developed comfortable relationships with our succession of family dogs, understanding that the animals served as both companions and informal security systems, whose instincts often provided the first warning of situations requiring adult attention. Linda's garden expanded during these years, her flowers and vegetables creating a domestic counterpoint to the industrial landscape of rusted metal and automotive parts that defined our professional environment. The transition to grandparenthood in the early 2000s brought new appreciation for the continuity represented by family traditions and inherited wisdom, even when that inheritance included unresolved questions about previous generations' choices and compromises. Michael's sons, David and Jonathan, spent summer weeks learning skills that connected them to their great-grandfather Walter's legacy, while remaining insulated from the moral ambiguities that had complicated Frank's version of the family business. Jessica's daughter Emma showed particular interest in the restoration aspects of our work, her artistic sensibilities helping her appreciate the transformation of DAM. Aged vehicles into functional beauty. Mars's successor, a golden retriever named Jupiter, demonstrated the breed's consistent ability to read human intentions and social dynamics, his calm presence providing stability during busy periods, while his alert responses warned of situations requiring closer attention or modified approaches to customer interactions. The first indication that Frank's buried secrets might eventually surface came in the form of Jupiter's unusual behavior during the summer of 2018. The dog had always been selective about which areas of the yard triggered his investigative instincts, but he began displaying persistent interest in sections where we stored vehicles, awaiting parts removal or final disposition. His attention wasn't random. He focused on specific cars while ignoring others, circling certain vehicles repeatedly before sitting in alert position, as if waiting for me to notice something significant. Linda observed that Jupiter's behavior reminded her of stories I'd shared about previous dogs in our family, their ability to detect scents and disturbances that escaped human awareness. When I mentioned Jupiter's fixation to Jessica during one of her visits, she suggested that changes in routine or unfamiliar visitors might be triggering protective instincts that had developed over generations of dogs whose primary responsibility involved monitoring the salvage yard for security purposes. The pattern of Jupiter's alerts became more specific during the autumn months, with his attention focusing on vehicles stored near the back fence adjacent to the Hendricks property. This undeveloped tract had been for sale throughout my adult life, its thick woods and seasonal flooding making it unsuitable for residential development, but perfect for concealing activities that required privacy from neighboring properties. Jupiter's investigations led him repeatedly to the fence line, where he would pace and sniff before looking back at me expectantly, as if requesting permission to pursue whatever had captured his attention beyond our property boundaries. The rational part of my mind dismissed these episodes as responses to wildlife or seasonal changes, but 40 years of working with dogs had taught me that their instincts often detected significant patterns before human awareness recognized developing situations. Linda's concern about Jupiter's restlessness motivated my decision to investigate the source of his fixation, though I approached the task with skepticism about finding anything more substantial than deer trails or abandoned camping sites. The discovery of fresh tire tracks in soft soil beyond our back fence confirmed that Jupiter's alerts had identified genuine human activity rather than wildlife or imagination. Following these tracks through seasonal undergrowth led to a well-hidden 1970 Chevelle SS that had clearly been abandoned for years, but showed recent signs of human attention. Someone had been visiting this car regularly, clearing sight lines and creating pathways that allowed access without leaving obvious evidence from surrounding roads. Jupiter's excitement upon reaching the vehicle was palpable, his systematic investigation of the perimeter suggesting that multiple people had spent considerable time here over an extended period. The Chevelle itself represented significant value despite its deteriorated condition, a genuine SS model that would interest serious collectors if properly restored. Standing beside the abandoned car, while Jupiter continued his methodical scent analysis, I felt the same combination of excitement and apprehension that had characterized my childhood discoveries in Walter's salvage yard, the sense that important secrets were waiting to be uncovered by someone with enough patience and attention to detail. The decision to force open the Chevelle's trunk represented a moral crossroads that connected my current situation to the unresolved questions about Frank's activities 30 years earlier. Jupiter's focused attention on the rear of the vehicle suggested that whatever secrets it contained were concentrated in that area, while my legal knowledge indicated that investigating abandoned property without proper authorization could create complications regardless of my intentions. Linda's practical advice was to contact local authorities and let them handle whatever discoveries might emerge, but my family's complex history with law enforcement made that option less appealing than conducting initial investigation privately. The metal strongbox I found in the trunk contained documents that made my hands tremble as their implications became clear. Bank withdrawal slips totaling over $200,000, surveillance photographs of local businesses, and detailed notes written in Frank's distinctive handwriting that outlined security patterns and cash flow analysis for 3 different banks in surrounding counties. The careful documentation could serve only one purpose. Indeed, its discovery, 30 years after Frank's death, finally provided answers to questions I'd been afraid to ask directly. The photographs were particularly damaging because they showed Frank's professional expertise applied to criminal planning. His eye for detail and systematic approach focused on identifying vulnerabilities in bank security systems and employee routines. The surveillance notes included information that could only have been gathered through extended observation: shift changes, armored car schedules, peak cash periods, and staff members' personal habits that might affect their vigilance during specific time periods. Combined with the withdrawal records showing Frank's access to significant amounts of cash during September 1987, the evidence painted a clear picture of preparation for bank robberies that had apparently never been executed. Jupiter pressed against my leg as I sat in the driver's seat processing this information, his warm presence providing comfort while my understanding of family history underwent complete reconstruction. The careful handwriting that had taught me to document automotive transactions had also been used to plan crimes that would have destroyed everything Walter had built and everything I had inherited. The scope of Frank's criminal planning became even more disturbing as I examined additional documents hidden beneath the bank surveillance materials. Code names and contact information suggested a network of collaborators, likely other Vietnam veterans whose disillusionment had led them to consider robbery as justified retaliation against institutions they blamed for their economic struggles. plans were sophisticated, showing military-style tactical thinking applied to civilian targets, with contingency arrangements and escape routes that demonstrated serious commitment to executing the robberies if circumstances aligned properly. Frank's sudden death in March 1988 had apparently prevented the group from moving forward with their plans, but the abandoned evidence represented a time bomb that could still destroy multiple families if discovered by less scrupulous individuals. My phone calls to Linda from the car were necessarily cryptic, but her understanding of family dynamics helped her recognize that I'd uncovered something significant enough to require careful handling and probably legal consultation. The decision to contact federal authorities rather than local police reflected both the interstate scope of what I discovered and my need to protect our family's reputation while ensuring proper justice. Agent Sarah Walsh from the FBI's Indianapolis field office brought expertise in financial crimes and a reassuring competence that helped steady my nerves during our initial telephone conversation. Her questions forced me to confront aspects of Frank's character that I deliberately avoided examining, the possibility that his post-war struggles had led him much further from legitimate business than I'd ever suspected. Jupiter's immediate acceptance of Agent Walsh when she visited our property seemed like a positive sign, his calm demeanor suggesting that she represented help rather than additional threat. The formal interview process required me to provide detailed information about Frank's associates, customers, and business practices, while acknowledging that my knowledge had been deliberately limited by his security measures and compartmentalization of sensitive activities. Agent Walsh's investigation revealed the extent of the conspiracy that Frank had apparently abandoned before his death, a network of disaffected veterans who had formed loose criminal associations during the 1980s as their economic situations deteriorated and their disillusionment with civilian society deepened. The surveillance materials I discovered represented months of preparation for coordinated bank robberies across multiple counties, crimes that would have yielded enough money to fund the conspirators' relocation to areas where their military skills might be more valued than their criminal records. Frank's role had apparently involved providing logistical support and secure storage for equipment and documentation, his salvage yard serving as a meeting place and supply depot for men whose shared combat experience had created bonds that transcended normal ethical boundaries. The other conspirators, now elderly men scattered across Indiana and Kentucky, faced federal charges that would likely result in probation given their age and the passage of time. But the psychological burden of carrying such secrets for 30 years had already exacted its own punishment through failed marriages, substance abuse, and social isolation. The confrontation with my own naivety proved more challenging than facing external legal consequences, requiring me to reconstruct my understanding of Frank's character while preserving respect for the legitimate lessons he'd taught me about business and fam. Wily responsibility, Linda's steady support during this period, became the anchor that prevented complete emotional collapse, her practical wisdom helping me separate Frank's wartime trauma and financial desperation from the values he'd actually demonstrated through daily example. She pointed out that his decision not to proceed with the planned crimes, whether motivated by moral concerns or simply by recognition of likely consequences, represented the ultimate choice between family security and criminal temptation. Jupiter seemed to sense the household's emotional upheaval, staying closer to both of us during daily routines, while accepting longer walks through winter landscape that provided opportunities for processing the implications of learning that even fundamentally decent people could contemplate terrible choices when pushed beyond their psychological limits. The resolution of Agent Walsh's investigation brought unexpected relief rather than the dramatic vindication or devastating exposure I'd anticipated during months of internal turmoil. Her thorough analysis confirmed that no actual crimes had been completed, the money found in the strongbox belonging to Frank's legitimate business accounts, withdrawn but never used for illegal purposes because the planned robberies had never progressed beyond the preparation stage. The surveillance materials represented intelligence gathering that never translated into criminal action, perhaps stopped by Frank's own moral boundaries or simply by his untimely death before final decisions were made. Rather than destroying Frank's reputation in the community, the discovery allowed me to understand the full context of his post-war struggles and ultimately appreciate the strength required to resist desperate solutions when resistance meant accepting financial hardship with dignity intact. The federal investigation concluded without charges against Frank's estate, though several surviving conspirators faced consequences appropriate to their continued involvement in related criminal activities during the intervening decades. The practical aftermath involved securing the abandoned Chevelle through proper legal channels, while ensuring that any remaining evidence of Frank's criminal associations was handled according to federal guidelines. Agent Walsh's recommendation that the vehicle be claimed through standard procedures for abandoned property allowed me to legally acquire a car that would serve as both restoration project and daily reminder of the complexity underlying family legacies. The Chevelle's restoration became a therapeutic activity that occupied weekend hours while providing opportunities to explain family history to grandchildren in ways that acknowledged Frank's mistakes without destroying their respect for his positive contributions. Jupiter's role in uncovering the truth became a family legend, his instincts having guided us toward resolution rather than disaster, his loyalty providing stability during a period when fundamental assumptions about family history underwent complete revision. The abandoned car, gradually transformed from rusted shell to functional beauty, served as a tangible representation of the possibility for redemption and the importance of facing difficult truths with courage rather than denial. The deeper lessons emerged gradually during the months following Agent Walsh's investigation, as I learned to integrate newfound knowledge about Frank's character with existing appreciation for his positive influence on my development and values. His careful documentation of criminal plans had been matched by equally careful documentation of legitimate business practices. His strategic thinking applied to family security as well as criminal opportunity, his loyalty to fellow veterans balanced by ultimate loyalty to family members who depended on his integrity. The Abandoned Chevelle project provided opportunities to share these nuanced understandings with Michael and Jessica, helping them process their grandfather's complexity while maintaining respect for the legitimate lessons he'd taught through example. Linda's garden provided the perfect metaphor for family growth, her flowers and vegetables flourishing despite being rooted in soil that contained both nourishment and contamination, beauty emerging from ground that had been prepared by generations of work that included mistakes as well as achievements. The restoration of the Chevelle also created opportunities to connect with other car enthusiasts whose own family histories included similar complexities, men and women whose inherited vehicles carried stories of previous generations, struggles with economic hardship, war trauma, and moral compromises that had shaped their descendants' understanding of integrity and family loyalty. These conversations helped me recognize that Frank's criminal temptation had been far from unique among his generation of veterans, that his ultimate decision to assist illegal solutions placed him among the majority of men who found legal ways to address post-war challenges despite economic difficulties and psychological struggles. Jupiter's presence during these discussions provided continuity with family traditions while representing the possibility for future generations to benefit from hard-won wisdom without inheriting the moral burdens that had complicated their ancestors' choices. Standing in the garage today, watching Rex sleep beside the completely restored Chevelle while my grandson David learns to distinguish original parts from reproductions, I understand that the most valuable discoveries aren't always the ones that make us wealthy or famous. Sometimes finding the truth means accepting that people we love carried burdens we never suspected, fought internal battles we never knew about, and made choices that required more moral courage than we initially recognized. Rex's loyalty through that difficult period of discovery and revelation taught me that some relationships transcend words and explanations, offering steadfast companionship when familiar assumptions about family and integrity shift beneath our feet. The experience fundamentally changed how I view both past and present, making me more attentive to subtle signs that important truths might be hidden beneath ordinary surfaces, more appreciative of people's capacity for growth and redemption, and more committed to facing difficult realities with honesty rather than comfortable denial. The Chevelle itself has become more than a restored classic car. It serves as a daily reminder that beauty and value can emerge from the most troubled histories when approached with patience, skill, and determination to honor positive possibilities while acknowledging negative realities. Teaching David and Jonathan to work on the car provides opportunities to pass down legitimate automotive knowledge while sharing age-appropriate versions of family history that emphasize learning from previous generations' mistakes rather than repeating them. Rex's calm presence during these lessons represents continuity with family traditions that have adapted and survived despite moral challenges that might have destroyed less resilient relationships. The restored Chevelle draws admiration at local car shows, where its story can be shared without revealing details that would serve no constructive purpose, its beauty standing as testimony to the possibility for redemption and transformation, even when original circumstances involved serious moral compromises. The broader implications of the discovery continue to influence my approach to business relationships and community involvement, making me more aware of the signs that might indicate when apparently legitimate activities conceal problematic elements requiring closer examination. The experience taught me to trust instincts about situations that feel wrong even when logical analysis can't identify specific problems, to pay attention when longtime animal companions display unusual behavior patterns, and to investigate concerns thoroughly rather than dismissing them as paranoia or imagination. Linda's support throughout the ordeal reinforced my appreciation for partnerships built on trust and communication, relationships that can withstand discoveries that challenge fundamental assumptions about shared history and values. Her practical wisdom helped me navigate the complex process of integrating disturbing new knowledge about Frank's character while maintaining respect for his positive contributions to family development and community welfare. The federal investigation's conclusion without criminal charges against Frank's estate allowed our family to process his complex legacy privately while contributing to broader understanding of post-war veteran experiences and their ongoing impact on American communities. Agent Walsh's professional handling of sensitive information protected innocent family members from unnecessary public scrutiny while ensuring that justice was served in cases where criminal activity had actually been completed by other conspirators. The experience provided valuable perspective on the difference between criminal temptation and criminal action, the importance of ultimate choices over temporary considerations, and the possibility for moral redemption even when initial impulses lead toward questionable decisions. These distinctions became important elements of the family history I've shared with children and grandchildren, lessons that acknowledge human weakness while emphasizing the importance of character and integrity in making crucial life decisions. The salvage yard continues to operate according to the legitimate principles that Walter established and that I've maintained despite learning about Frank's temporary deviation from family ethical standards. The business serves the same community of restoration enthusiasts and practical customers who appreciate expertise, fair dealing, and reliable parts sourcing, relationships that have survived the test of time because they're built on genuine value rather than convenient arrangements. Rex's successors will continue the family tradition of serving as both companions and informal security systems, their instincts providing early warning about situations that might require closer examination or modified approaches. The combination of inherited wisdom and hard-won experience has created a foundation for future generations that acknowledges past mistakes while emphasizing the importance of learning from history rather than being paralyzed by it. Have you ever discovered something that completely changed your understanding of someone you thought you knew perfectly? The weight of those revelations can be overwhelming, especially when they involve family members whose memory you've cherished, but sometimes they lead us to deeper appreciation for the complexity of human experience and the courage required to face difficult truths with grace. The process of integrating disturbing new information about people we love teaches us that moral judgment must account for context and ultimate choices rather than temporary temptations, that redemption remains possible even when initial impulses lead toward questionable decisions, and that family legacies can survive moral challenges when approached with honesty, wisdom, and commitment to learning from previous generations' experiences rather than repeating their mistakes.